The courtroom reeked of bleach and betrayal. My husband smirked as his lawyer called me a paranoid drunk unfit to be a mother. I thought I had lost everything until my son's old phone connected to the court display. A photo from a New Year's party I was never invited to appeared. It did not just reveal his mistress, but exposed a dark conspiracy that made the judge order handcuffs for both of them right on the spot. My name is Elena, and at 34 years old, I had become a ghost in my own life. I stood in the center of our expansive, ultra-modern kitchen in Seattle, holding my breath as I turned the gas burner on low. The house was silent, a heavy, suffocating silence that I had learned not to disturb. The only sound was the soft hiss of the flame and the rhythmic tapping of rain against the floor-to-ceiling windows. I moved with the precision of a bomb disposal expert, ensuring the ceramic pan did not clink against the grate. Julian hated unnecessary noise in the morning. At exactly 7 o'clock, I heard the heavy footsteps descending the floating staircase. Julian walked into the room with the posture of a king surveying his kingdom, or perhaps a CEO inspecting a failing subsidiary. At 45, my husband still possessed the sharp, predatory handsomeness that made him the face of Vanguard Horizons, his real estate empire. He did not look at me. He walked straight to the espresso machine, his eyes glued to the scrolling stock market news on his tablet. "Your coffee is ready," I said softly, placing the cup on the marble island at the exact angle he preferred. Julian took a sip, his eyes never leaving the screen. He grimaced slightly. Then he reached up and touched the collar of his dress shirt. "There is a crease here." "Elena," he said, his voice level but laced with distinct irritation. "Right here on the left. Did you even look at it before you put it on the hanger? I ironed it twice." "Julian, maybe it happened when you—" He finally looked at me then, his gaze cold enough to freeze the steam rising from his cup. "Don't make excuses. It's sloppy, just like these eggs. They are overcooked. Again. Is it really so hard to focus on one simple task?" I felt the familiar sting of tears pricking my eyes, but I swallowed them down. Before I could apologize for the crime of cooking breakfast, the sound of small, thumping feet echoed from the hallway. Leo, our 8-year-old son, burst into the kitchen, his hair a messy halo of sleep. "Daddy, you're still here." The transformation was instant and terrifyingly seamless. The cold tycoon vanished, replaced by a warm, doting father. Julian spun around on his bar stool, a wide, perfect smile plastered on his face. "Hey there, little man," Julian boomed, opening his arms. "Of course I'm here. I couldn't leave without seeing my favorite guy." He spent exactly 5 minutes with Leo. He asked about school and ruffled Leo's hair, checking his watch surreptitiously over the boy's shoulder. "Can we play catch later?" Leo asked, his eyes full of hope. "I have a big board meeting tonight. Sport. But tell you what," Julian said, winking. "I will order that expensive robot kit you wanted. The big one. How does that sound?" Leo cheered, oblivious to the transaction that had just occurred. Julian stood up, buttoned his jacket, and grabbed his briefcase. He walked past me as if I were a piece of furniture. "Make sure he finishes his homework." He threw over his shoulder. I watched through the window as his red sports car roared down the driveway, disappearing without a wave or a backward glance. The silence rushed back into the house, heavier than before. I sat down at the island, staring at his uneaten eggs. Years ago, I was a senior data analyst. I managed teams. I predicted market trends. Then Julian had convinced me that my place was here, supporting his rise, managing his home. He had slowly chipped away at my career until nothing was left but this hollow domesticity. My phone buzzed on the counter. It was a notification from the bank. "Alert credit limit on ending in 4412 has been decreased by 50%. I frowned. That had to be a mistake. Julian handled the finances, but a 50% drop was drastic. I told myself it was just the economy, or perhaps a security glitch. I would ask him later, if he came home in a mood to talk. To distract myself, I went to clean his home office. It was technically forbidden territory, but the maid was out sick and the rug needed vacuuming. As I moved a stack of architectural blueprints to dust the mahogany desk, something colorful caught my eye. It was a glossy brochure for a penthouse suite, the Zurich Summit Luxury Residences. I picked it up. It was not a vacation rental. It was a sales listing for a permanent residence in Switzerland. Why would Julian be looking at apartments in Zurich? He had always said he hated Europe. A knot of uneasiness tightened in my stomach. I tried to brush it off, telling myself it was just for a potential Vanguard Horizons investment. I put the brochure back exactly where I found it and hurried out of the room, my heart rate uncomfortably high. I tried to occupy myself with laundry and meal prep, but the image of that Zurich apartment kept flashing in my mind. The anxiety was a low hum in my ears all morning. Then, at exactly 12 o'clock, the doorbell rang. I wiped my hands on a towel and walked to the door. A courier stood there, holding a thick manila envelope. "Elena Vance," he asked. "Yes." He shoved the clipboard at me. "Sign here." I signed, my hand trembling slightly. He handed me the envelope and walked away without another word. I stared at the return address. It was from a law firm I did not recognize. I tore the tab open, standing right there in the foyer. I pulled out the documents. The first words I saw made the breath leave my lungs as if I had been punched in the gut. Petition for dissolution of marriage. I stood there, my hands trembling so hard the paper made a sharp rattling sound against the silence of the foyer. The words on the page blurred and swam before my eyes, but their meaning was razor sharp. Chronic alcoholism, severe psychological instability, potential for domestic violence. "This is insane," I whispered to the empty room. I don't even drink." The front door clicked open. It was noon, a time when the house was usually empty. Julian walked in, but the air around him felt different today. It was frigid. Behind him trailed a man in a charcoal suit, clutching a briefcase like a weapon. Julian did not take off his coat. He looked at me, not with the disdain from breakfast, but with the detached indifference of a stranger looking at a stain on the carpet. "I see you got the package," Julian said, his voice flat. "Julian, what is this?" I held up the papers, my voice shaking. "You're accusing me of being an alcoholic. You know I only drink sparkling water. How could you save the histrionics for the judge?" "Elena," he cut in smoothly. He turned to the man in the suit. "This is exactly the kind of unstable behavior I briefed you on." The lawyer nodded solemnly. Julian turned back to me, his face a mask of stone. "Our marriage has been over for a long time. I have just been waiting for the right moment to formalize it. As of this morning, all joint accounts have been frozen. You have access to a debit card with $500 on it. That should cover your essentials for the next few days." $500? I gasped. Stepping back, "Julian, I have no savings." "You told me to quit my job." "You told me, and you have 3 days to vacate the premises," the lawyer added, checking his watch. "Vacate. This is my home. Where am I supposed to go with Leo?" Julian let out a short, dry laugh that chilled my blood. "Leo, you are not taking my son anywhere. You think a court will grant custody to a jobless, homeless woman with a drinking problem." "That is a lie," I screamed, finally losing my composure. "I have never been drunk in my life." Julian reached into his jacket pocket and tossed a stack of photographs onto the console table. I scrambled to look at them. They were pictures of me at various galas and dinners over the last 6 months. In every single one, I was holding a wine glass filled with red liquid, cranberry juice. I choked out, tears streaming down my face. That was cranberry juice. "You handed me those glasses, Julian. You said to hold them for the toast so I wouldn't look rude. It looks like a vintage Merlot to me," he said with a smirk. "And combined with the testimony of our housekeeper about your morning naps and mood swings, The narrative is quite clear. The realization hit me like a physical blow. The decreased credit limit, the apartment in Zurich, the way he had insisted I hold drinks I didn't consume. He had been planning this for months. He had choreographed my destruction while sleeping in the bed next to me. "You set me up," I whispered. "You stole my life." Julian took a step closer, invading my personal space. His cologne, usually comforting, now smelled like poison. "Look at yourself, Elena," he sneered, his voice dropping to a cruel whisper. "You are pathetic. You have no career, no money, no connections. You are just a shell. You have no value left." I felt my knees give way. I collapsed onto the cold tile, sobbing uncontrollably. Julian watched me for a second, satisfied, then turned to his lawyer. "Let's go. I'm staying at the Four Seasons until she is out." "Make sure the security team is ready to escort her on Friday." The door slammed shut, the sound echoing like a gunshot. I lay there for what felt like hours. Finally, panic seized me. "Leo!" I scrambled to my feet and ran up the stairs to his room. I grabbed his pillow and buried my face in it, inhaling the scent of his shampoo. I needed to protect him. I had to take him and run. But where? With what money? $500 wouldn't even buy a plane ticket. I fumbled for my phone, my fingers slick with sweat. I called Jessica, my best friend from college, the wife of one of Julian's partners. Jessica's voice was tight, guarded. "Jess, please, you have to help me. Julian has gone crazy. He's kicking me out. Can I stay with you for a night?" There was a long, painful pause. "Elena, honey," she said, her tone dripping with false pity. "Julian told us about the relapse. He showed us the photos. I have kids in the house. I can't have that kind of environment around them. I think you need professional help." "It's a lie," I cried. "Jessica, listen to me. Please don't call again." "Elena." The line went dead. I dialed another number, then another, rejection after rejection. Julian had not just divorced me, he had systematically dismantled my reality and sold a false version of me to the world. I was alone in the mansion, surrounded by expensive silence, realizing with terrified clarity that I was drowning, and my husband was the one holding my head under the water. The smell of damp drywall and stale cigarette smoke greeted me as I unlocked the door to my new reality. It was a one-bedroom apartment in a crumbling complex 20 miles south of the city, the only place that would take a tenant with no credit history and cash up front. I set my single suitcase on the stained beige carpet. The silence here was different from the mansion. It was not the silence of suppression. It was the silence of abandonment. But as I looked around at the peeling paint, the despair that had paralyzed me for 3 days began to curdle into something hotter, sharper. Rage. I was not just a discarded trophy wife. I was a senior data analyst who had once led a department of 40 people. Julian had forgotten that. He thought he had broken me, but he had only stripped away the distractions. I sat down at the wobbly laminate table in the kitchenette and opened my laptop. It was an old model, one Julian hadn't bothered to confiscate because he deemed it obsolete. I cracked my knuckles. "Okay, Julian," I whispered to the empty room. "Let's see where you hid the money." I started with the family cloud account. I knew Julian's password because he used the same variation of his first startup's stock ticker for everything. I typed it in. Access granted. My heart leaped, but it sank just as quickly. The photo stream was empty for the last 6 months. He had switched devices and created a new private ID. He was thorough. I leaned back, frustration gnawing at me. Then, a memory surfaced. Last month, Leo had dropped his iPad in the driveway. The screen had shattered. Julian had thrown a fit, tossed the device into the garage trash bin, and bought a new one the next day. I had fished it out later that night, intending to recycle it properly, but I had hidden it in a box of winter coats instead. I scrambled to my suitcase and dug through the layers of clothes until my fingers brushed against the cold, cracked glass. It wouldn't turn on. 2 hours later, I was standing in a cramped electronics repair shop sandwiched between a laundromat and a liquor store. The technician, a teenager with purple hair, looked at the device skeptically. "The motherboard might be fried," he said, chewing gum loudly. "It's gonna cost at least $150 just to look at it." "I need the data," I said, my voice steady. "Photos, videos, app backups, anything that synced before it died. Can you do it? I can try. Come back in 48 hours. With the iPad in the shop, I needed legal muscle. I couldn't afford the sharks Julian hired, so I went to the bottom of the barrel. I found Marcus quietly tucked away in a brick building that smelled of old law books and pipe tobacco. He was 70 if he was a day, with stains on his tie and a reputation for hating corporate bullies. He listened to my story without blinking, his eyes narrowing as I described the fake alcoholism evidence. "It's a classic setup," Marcus grumbled, leaning forward. "He has money, power, and a narrative. You have nothing. I can't take a case on charity." "Mrs. Vance," I reached into my purse and pulled out the one thing Julian hadn't thought to strip from my finger in his haste. My wedding ring. A 3-carat diamond set in platinum. "I don't know what this is worth on the street," I said, placing it on his scarred wooden desk, "but it was appraised at $50,000 5 years ago. Take it. Just promise me you will fight him." Marcus looked at the ring, then at me. He picked it up, weighing it in his hand. "This will cover the retainer and the filing fees," he said gruffly. "But listen to me closely. We are going up against a legion of lawyers in Italian suits. We don't need probable cause. We don't need suspicion. We need a silver bullet. Unless you find something that proves he is lying, you will lose that boy. I will find it. I promised." I returned to the apartment and emptied the last bag I had brought with me. It was a laundry bag I had grabbed in my panic. Inside were 3 of Julian's custom-tailored suits that I had been meaning to take to the dry cleaners. I turned the pockets inside out. Julian was arrogant. He believed I was too stupid to look, or too beaten down to care. Lint. A wrapper for a breath mint. And then, crumpled in the inner pocket of his navy blazer, a handful of receipts. I smoothed them out on the table. They were for dinners, hotels, and consultancy fees. One name appeared 3 times in the last month alone, scrawled on the back of valet tickets and printed on invoices for image crisis management. Sienna Vance. I read aloud. I pulled up a search engine and typed in the name. The results flooded the screen. Sienna Vance. 30 years old, Ivy League education, a shark in the world of public relations. She was beautiful, sharp, and terrifyingly accomplished. She was everything I used to be, but polished to a lethal shine. I looked at the dates on the receipts. Every time Julian had a late board meeting, he was billing a dinner with Sienna. She wasn't just fixing his company's image. She was helping him erase his wife. "Got you," I whispered, a cold shiver running down my spine. "You aren't just a mistress. Sienna." "You are the architect?" I spent the entire night staring at Sienna Vance's online profile, and it was like looking into a distorted mirror of my own past. She was 30 years old, a Columbia graduate, and the founder of a boutique crisis management firm. She was sharp, ambitious, and radiated a kind of lethal perfection that I had once possessed before I traded my power suits for aprons. Julian had not just found a younger woman. He had found the version of me he had originally fallen in love with before he systematically dismantled her. My phone rang at 7 in the morning. It was Marcus. I found the money trail, he rasped, skipping the pleasantries. Vanguard Horizons transferred $250,000 to Vance Consulting 3 weeks before Julian served you the papers. He labeled it as reputation management. He is paying her $250,000 to orchestrate your destruction. Elena. I gripped the phone tighter. "I will see them at the mediation in an hour." The mediation room was sterile, with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city I used to feel part of. Julian sat at the mahogany table, looking bored. Next to him sat Sienna. Seeing her in person was a physical blow. She wore a cream-colored suit that cost more than my first car, and her posture was impeccable. "Who is she?" I asked, my voice trembling slightly despite my best efforts. "Ms. Vance is here as my image consultant," Julian said smoothly, not even looking up from his phone. "Given your unstable behavior, I need a witness to ensure my public reputation remains intact during these proceedings." The mediator, a tired-looking man named Mr. Henderson, shuffled his papers. "Let us begin. We are here to discuss the temporary custody arrangement." Sienna leaned forward, resting her chin on her hand. She looked at me with eyes that were terrifyingly void of empathy. As the mediator discussed visitation schedules, Sienna stood up to pour water. She walked past my chair, her movement fluid and predatory. She leaned down, just inches from my ear, under the pretense of picking up a dropped pen. "He told me everything," she whispered, her voice like silk wrapped around a razor blade. "He said sleeping with you was like sleeping with a corpse. He says you smell like desperation and old milk." The rage flared in my chest, hot and blinding. I wanted to scream. I wanted to grab her by her perfectly styled hair and slam her face into the table. My hand twitched, rising from my lap. "Don't give them the ammunition," Marcus's voice echoed in my head. "They want you to explode." I forced my hand back down, digging my fingernails into my palm until the skin broke. I took a deep, shuddering breath and looked straight ahead. "Mr. Henderson," I said, my voice steady. "Can we please focus on my son?" Julian looked up, a flicker of disappointment crossing his face. He exchanged a quick, irritated glance with Sienna. They had lost this round. "Fine," Julian scoffed. "Let's talk about Leo. You want him to visit you, where in that rat-infested box you call an apartment? It is 20 miles out of the city. Elena, do you really think a boy raised in luxury should be subjected to that kind of squalor? It is a clean, safe home." I defended, though my cheeks burned with shame. "It is a slum," Julian corrected coldly. "Leo would be mortified. He would be traumatized just walking through the front door. Honestly, Elena, if you loved him, you would let him go." I walked out of that room an hour later, feeling hollowed out. I had survived the ambush, but the war was far from won. Marcus walked me to the elevator, his face grim. "I have bad news," he said quietly. I saw a document in their stack when the lawyer opened his briefcase. It was an enrollment form for La Rosie, the boarding school I asked, confused. "But that is in Switzerland." "Exactly." Marcus nodded. "He isn't just fighting for custody. Elena, he is planning to ship Leo off to Switzerland the moment the divorce is finalized. He wants to cut you out completely. You won't see your son until he is 18. The panic that gripped me was absolute. I drove back to my dingy apartment, my hands shaking on the steering wheel. I needed that silver bullet. I needed it now. I burst into my apartment and saw the iPad sitting on the table. The repair shop had called an hour ago, saying the screen was fixed. I grabbed it, my heart pounding against my ribs. I pressed the home button. The screen lit up, bright and clear. Enter passcode. My mind went blank. I tried Leo's birthday. Incorrect. I tried Julian's birthday. Incorrect. I tried the day we bought the dog. Incorrect. Think. Elena. Think, I screamed at myself, pulling at my hair. I stared at the device, the gateway to my salvation, locked behind 4 simple digits that I could not remember. The screen mocked me, counting down the seconds until it would disable itself for 15 minutes. I was a data analyst who could crack complex market trends. Yet, I was being defeated by a child's password, while my son's ticket to Switzerland was being printed. The court-appointed visitation center smelled like hand sanitizer and despair. I sat on a hard plastic chair, my hands clasped tightly in my lap, watching the clock tick. We were allowed exactly 1 hour. When the heavy door finally buzzed open, my heart broke all over again. Leo walked in, but he did not run to me like he usually did. He walked with his head down, dragging his feet. He looked thinner, and there were dark circles under his eyes that no 8-year-old should ever have. A supervisor with a clipboard sat in the corner, watching us like a hawk. "Leo," I whispered, dropping to my knees to hug him. He stiffened at first, then collapsed into my arms, burying his face in my neck. He was trembling. "I missed you so much, baby," I said, fighting back tears. "Are you okay? Is Daddy taking care of you?" Leo didn't answer immediately. Instead, he pulled back slightly and fumbled with the hem of his sleeve. He glanced nervously at the supervisor in the corner, then shoved his small hand into mine. I felt a crumpled piece of paper press against my palm. I remembered. "Mommy," he whispered, his voice barely audible. "The numbers. For the iPad. It's Buster's birthday." I closed my fingers around the paper, hiding it instantly. Buster was our golden retriever who had passed away 2 years ago. Of course. It was the only date that meant as much to Leo as it did to me. I stroked his hair, trying to soothe him, but he leaned in closer, his breath hitching. "Mom," he stammered, his eyes wide with fear. "Dad and Miss Sienna. They are very scary. They made me practice." "Practice what, Leo?" I asked, a cold dread pooling in my stomach. "Lying," he whispered, a tear escaping his eye. "They force me to sit in a chair for hours. They tell me what to say to the doctor. I have to say you are sick. I have to say I am scared of you. If I get it wrong..." Miss Sienna takes away my dinner. The rage that exploded in my chest was so violent I almost vomited. They were starving him. They were brainwashing my son to testify against me. "Listen to me," I said fiercely, gripping his shoulders. "You are so brave. I am going to fix this, I promise." The hour ended too soon. As they led him away, he looked back at me with a desperation that seared my soul. I walked out of that center with a new kind of determination. This was no longer just about money or betrayal. This was a rescue mission. I drove back to my apartment, ignoring the speed limit. I threw the door open and grabbed the iPad. My fingers shook as I smoothed out the crumpled note Leo had given me. Written in shaky crayon scrawl were 4 digits 1105. I typed them in. The screen unlocked. I let out a breath I didn't know I was holding. Immediately, the device connected to the apartment Wi-Fi. A notification popped up: iCloud storage full. Resume syncing. "Yes," I hissed. "Sync everything." The progress bar crawled forward. 5%. 20%. Thousands of photos and videos began to populate the gallery. It was a digital avalanche. Most of it was useless, hundreds of screenshots of Minecraft, blurry photos of the floor, selfies Leo had taken with funny filters. I sat there for hours, filtering, sorting, and analyzing. My eyes burned. I started looking for the anomalies. Leo had said this iPad used to be Julian's burner device for games before he gave it to Leo. That meant there was a window of time where Julian's private data might have overlapped with Leo's account. I found a folder labeled Receipts. My heart hammered against my ribs. I opened it. It was a goldmine of corruption. There were photos of bank transfer slips to shell companies in the Cayman Islands. There were screenshots of encrypted chats discussing how to hide assets from the witch me. "Got you," I muttered, taking screenshots of everything. But as I stared at the financial evidence, a cold realization washed over me. This proved Julian was a fraud and a thief. Yes, it would get me a better settlement. But would it stop him from taking Leo? Julian's lawyers would argue that white-collar crime did not make him an unfit father. They would say he could still provide for Leo in Switzerland while he fought the charges. I needed something worse. I needed something that showed he was dangerous. I kept scrolling. My eyes were red and gritty. It was 3 in the morning. I was about to give up when I saw a folder at the very bottom of the list. It was dated December 31st of last year, New Year's Eve. I froze. That was the night Julian told me he was stuck in Tokyo on business. He had even FaceTimed me for 2 minutes against a white wall to wish me a Happy New Year. I had spent the night alone with Leo, watching fireworks on TV. I tapped the folder. The location tag on the first photo didn't say Tokyo. It said Aspen, Colorado. I froze. That was the night Julian told me he was stuck in a blizzard in Tokyo, unable to fly home. I had even FaceTimed me for 2 minutes against a white wall to wish me a Happy New Year. I had spent the night alone with Leo, watching fireworks on TV, feeling guilty that my husband was working so hard for us. I frowned, tapping on the information tab. The photos had been uploaded from a device named Julian's burner. The realization hit me like a physical slap. Leo. My sweet, innocent Leo must have found Julian's secret phone, the one he used for his illicit dealings, and used it to play games. In his innocence, he must have clicked sync to Family Cloud, thinking he was saving his high scores. Julian, in his arrogance, had never checked the settings of the family account because he assumed I was too technologically illiterate to access it. I clicked on the first thumbnail. It was a video, 3 minutes long. I pressed play, and the sound of champagne corks and laughter filled my silent, empty apartment. The footage was shaky at first, likely recorded by the phone being propped up against a wine bottle. The setting was a luxurious private chalet. A fire roared in the background. Julian walked into the frame. He was not wearing a business suit. He was wearing a cashmere sweater, holding a glass of scotch. Sienna walked in a second later, wearing a silk robe. She sat on his lap, kissing him deeply. To the Tokyo lie. Julian toasted, clinking his glass against hers. She bought it, Sienna asked, laughing. God, she is so pathetic. Does she really think you are loyal? Elena wouldn't know loyalty if it hit her in the face, Julian sneered. She is just a placeholder until we get the clearance. My stomach churned, but I forced myself to keep watching. The camera angle shifted as a third person sat down at the table. I gasped. It was Councilman Roberts, a high-ranking city official who controlled zoning laws for the entire state. The zoning for the waterfront project is tricky. Julian, Roberts said, his voice slurred. There are environmental protections. That is why there is $500,000 in that briefcase. Roberts, Julian said, his voice dropping to a serious, predatory tone. And another $2 million once the permits are issued. I need that land rezoned by next month. Consider it done? Roberts grunted. But what about your wife? If she digs into the finances during the divorce, she might see the withdrawals. The room on the screen went silent. Julian leaned forward, his face twisted into a mask of pure malice. Elena won't be a problem, Julian said calmly. Sienna and I have a plan for that. Dr. Eris has already agreed to sign the commitment papers. We are going to stage an incident, a public breakdown. We will have her committed to the St. Jude Psychiatric Facility for severe hysteria and potential violence. Sienna giggled, tracing the rim of her glass. Once she is locked up, she loses all credibility. No judge will listen to a crazy woman, and while she is rotting in a padded room, we will be on a flight to Zurich with the boy. I stopped the video. I couldn't breathe. The air in my apartment felt thin, as if all the oxygen had been sucked out. This was not just a divorce. This was a conspiracy. Julian was not just trying to leave me, he was planning to erase me. He intended to bury me alive in an institution so he could continue his life of crime and steal my son. My hands shook violently, but my old instincts kicked in. I was an analyst. I dealt with data. I needed to secure this. I ran to my bag and pulled out 3 external hard drives. I plugged them in one by one. Copy, paste, verify. I uploaded the files to a secure, encrypted server that I had used in my old job, one Julian didn't even know existed. I emailed zip files to Marcus, to the state prosecutor's public tip line, and to 3 different news outlets, setting the emails to schedule for the morning if I didn't cancel them. I stared at the progress bar. 99%, 100%. My phone rang, shattering the silence. It was 3 o'clock in the morning. I picked it up. It was Marcus. "Elena," he said. His voice was not tired. It was trembling with an electric energy I had never heard from the old man before. "I just opened the files you sent. I am looking at the video of Councilman Roberts. Is it enough?" I asked, my voice cracking. "Is it enough to keep Leo Elena?" Marcus said, and I could hear him grinning through the phone. "We are not just going to win the divorce. We are not just going to keep Leo. This is a Class A felony. Bribery. Conspiracy to commit fraud. False imprisonment conspiracy. We aren't going to family court anymore. We are about to send your husband to federal prison for 20 years. The morning of the hearing, the courthouse steps looked like a red carpet event. Julian and Sienna arrived in a sleek black limousine. They stepped out into a flurry of camera flashes, looking every inch the power couple. Julian wore a bespoke navy suit, waving to the press with the confidence of a man who owned the city. Sienna was radiant in a white dress that suggested purity and professionalism, clutching a leather portfolio. They were surrounded by a phalanx of bodyguards and junior lawyers, a fortress of wealth and influence designed to intimidate. I arrived 10 minutes later in Marcus's rusted sedan. I wore my best suit, a gray one from 5 years ago that was slightly tight at the shoulders, but I had ironed it until the creases were razor sharp. I didn't have bodyguards. I didn't have cameras flashing for me, but as I walked up those steps, I didn't feel small. I felt dangerous. My hand brushed the small, cold shape of the USB drive in my pocket. It was the heaviest thing I had ever carried. Inside the courtroom, the air was thick with tension. Julian's lawyer, a man named Sterling who charged $1,000 an hour, wasted no time. He painted a picture of me that was unrecognizable. "Elena Vance is a woman in deep crisis," Sterling announced, pacing before the judge. "We have testimony confirming her erratic behavior, her neglect, and her dependency on alcohol." They called our former housekeeper to the stand. She avoided my eyes as she lied under oath, claiming she found empty wine bottles hidden in my laundry hamper and that I often forgot to pick Leo up from school. I sat perfectly still. Every muscle in my body wanted to scream, to stand up and call her a liar. But I looked at Marcus. He gave a barely perceptible shake of his head. "Wait," his eyes said. "Let them dig the hole." Then came the star witness. "The defense calls Ms. Sienna Vance," Sterling said. Sienna glided to the stand. She had been introduced not just as an image consultant, but as an independent family stability observer, a title they had fabricated for this charade. "Ms. Vance," Sterling asked gently, "in your professional observation, is Leo safe with his mother?" Sienna paused, her eyes filling with instant, manufactured tears. She dabbed at them with a silk handkerchief. "It breaks my heart to say this," she said, her voice trembling with practiced emotion. "But, no, I have seen the way she looks at him. It's manic. Leo is terrified. He told me he hides in his room because he is afraid his mother might hurt him during one of her episodes. I believe leaving him in her care would be catastrophic." The judge, a stern woman with gray hair, leaned forward. She looked at me, and for the first time, I saw pity in her eyes. It was the look you give a sick animal before you put it down. She was buying it. She believed I was the monster they had created. Julian smirked from his table. He thought he had won. Marcus stood up slowly. He adjusted his tie, looking every bit the disorganized, frantic old lawyer they assumed he was. "Ms. Vance," Marcus began, his voice wheezy, "you seem very invested in this family. Just to clarify for the court, your relationship with Mr. Vance is strictly professional. Is that correct? Sienna straightened her posture, looking offended. Absolutely. Mr. Vance hired my firm to manage the public fallout of this difficult divorce. My priority is the child's well-being. So, Marcus continued, shuffling some papers on his desk, there is no romantic involvement. No personal agenda. You are an unbiased third party. I am highly offended by that insinuation, Sienna snapped, her eyes flashing. I am a professional. There is absolutely no relationship between myself and Mr. Vance outside of our business contract. I barely know him on a personal level. Is that so? Marcus smiled. It wasn't a nice smile. It was the smile of a hunter who just heard the trap snap shut. No personal relationship. No hidden motives. Just business. Yes, Sienna said firmly, looking directly at the judge. Just business. I gripped the USB drive in my pocket. Liar, I thought, my heart pounding a war drum against my ribs. You just sealed your fate. Marcus smiled, a slow, predatory curving of his lips that transformed his entire demeanor from a bumbling old man into a lethal strategist. He turned to the bench, ignoring the furious glare from Julian's attorney. Your Honor, Marcus said, his voice ringing clear and steady. I would like to present a piece of digital evidence that has just come into our possession. It speaks directly to the credibility of the witness currently on the stand, and more importantly, to the safety of the child. Objection! Sterling shouted, leaping to his feet so fast his chair scraped loudly against the floor. This is an ambush. We have not had time to review this evidence. This is highly irregular. Judge Holloway looked over her spectacles. She was a woman who valued order, but she valued the truth more. She looked at Marcus, then at the frantic Sterling. Mr. Sterling, we are determining the fate of a minor, Judge Holloway said sharply. If there is evidence regarding the honesty of this witness, I will see it. Proceed. Counselor. Marcus reached into his pocket and pulled out the iPad, the original device. Not a copy. He walked over to the court clerk's desk and plugged it into the HDMI cable that fed the large monitors mounted on the walls of the courtroom. I would like to direct the court's attention to a folder titled New Year's Party, Marcus announced. The screens flickered to life. A grid of thumbnails appeared. Marcus tapped the first image. A high-resolution photo filled the courtroom. It was unmistakable. Julian and Sienna were locked in a passionate embrace, his hands gripping her waist, her fingers tangled in his hair. They were not business partners. They were lovers. A collective gasp swept through the gallery. The reporters in the back row began furiously typing on their phones. I looked at Julian. The color had drained from his face so completely that he looked like a wax figure. His mouth hung slightly open, his eyes darting from the screen to his lawyer. Sienna stood on the witness stand, frozen. Her mouth opened and closed, but no sound came out. The mask of the professional consultant had shattered. It seems, Marcus said dryly, that the relationship is a bit more personal than Ms. Vance just testified under oath. This is irrelevant, Sterling stammered, though his voice lacked conviction. A consensual affair does not prove my client is unfit. You are right. Marcus agreed pleasantly. Adultery is not a crime. But conspiracy is? Please watch this video. Your Honor. Marcus tapped a video file. The sound of a crackling fire and clinking glasses amplified through the courtroom speakers. On the screen, Julian and Sienna were sitting on a leather couch, looking relaxed and arrogant. Julian's voice boomed through the silent room, clear as a bell. Don't worry about her. It is all set. As soon as we throw that witch Elena in the asylum, we transfer this $50 million kickback to the Swiss account. She will be too medicated to even remember her own name, let alone testify about the zoning bribes. The courtroom went deathly silent. I saw the juror's eyes widen. Sterling sank back into his chair, burying his face in his hands. But the video was not over. On the screen, Sienna laughed, taking a sip of wine. She looked directly at the camera, her face twisted in a cruel smirk. I have already drafted the fake psych profile, Sienna said, her voice dripping with disdain. It is a masterpiece. That senile old judge will believe it easily. She is too busy thinking about her retirement to notice the inconsistencies. The audio cut out as the video ended. I slowly turned my head toward the bench. Judge Holloway was no longer looking at me with pity. Her face had turned a deep, violent shade of crimson. Her hands were gripping the gavel so tightly that her knuckles were white. She was staring at Sienna Vance with a look of pure, unadulterated fury. Sienna shrank back in the witness stand, trembling. She looked small now. The arrogance was gone, replaced by the terrified realization that she had just insulted the one person who held her fate in her hands. Senile, Judge Holloway repeated, her voice low and dangerous, vibrating with suppressed rage. Old. Judge, Your Honor, Sienna squeaked, her voice barely a whisper. I didn't mean. You didn't mean to get caught, Judge Holloway snapped, her eyes blazing. Marcus unplugged the iPad and turned to me. He winked. The silver bullet had not just hit the target, it had blown the entire target to pieces. The sound of the gavel striking the woodblock was like a gunshot that severed the tension in the room. Bam! 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 Bailiff Judge Holloway roared, her voice echoing off the mahogany walls. Lock the doors. No one leaves this courtroom. Not a single soul. Panic rippled through the gallery. The orderly legal proceeding had dissolved into a crime scene. Julian, realizing the walls were closing in, made a desperate, feral noise. He looked at the iPad still connected to the display system, the smoking gun that was burning his life to the ground. That is stolen property, Julian screamed, his composure shattering. Give that to me. He lunged. He scrambled over the defense table, knocking over a pitcher of water, his eyes wild. He reached for the cable, desperate to disconnect the damning evidence. But he never made it. 2 court officers tackled him mid-stride. They slammed him onto the carpeted floor with a heavy thud that made the jurors jump. Get off me, Julian bellowed, his face pressed against the floor. Do you know who I am? I am the CEO of Vanguard Horizons. I will buy and sell every one of you on the witness stand. Sienna Vance was unraveling. Her perfect hair was disheveled, and her face was blotchy with terror. She pointed a shaking finger at the screen. It's fake, she shrieked, her voice cracking. It's AI that is a deep fake. I never said those things. This is a digital fabrication. Marcus stepped forward, calm amidst the chaos. He held up a thick stack of papers. Your Honor, Marcus said, his voice cutting through Sienna's hysteria. I have the forensic report right here. The metadata is untouched. The geolocation tags, the device ID, and the voice print analysis all match. This video was recorded on December 31st at 11:58 p.m. in Aspen, Colorado. Unless AI can hallucinate a verified GPS signal from a device registered to Mr. Vance's personal account. This is as real as the handcuffs they are about to put on you. Judge Holloway stood up, towering over the bench. She looked down at the pair of them with absolute disgust. Julian Vance and Sienna Vance, she announced, her voice dripping with judicial wrath. You are hereby under arrest for perjury, fraud upon the court, and conspiracy to commit false imprisonment. Bailiff, take them into custody immediately. The click of handcuffs was the sweetest sound I had ever heard. Sienna began to sob loudly as an officer pulled her arms behind her back. Julian was hauled to his feet, his expensive suit wrinkled, his tie askew. The press photographers, sensing the kill, rushed the railing, their cameras flashing in a blinding staccato rhythm, capturing the fall of the titans. I stood up. My legs felt solid, rooted to the earth. I walked slowly toward where the officers were holding Julian. He looked up, his eyes meeting mine. The arrogance was gone. The cruelty was gone. All that was left was fear. "Julian," I said softly. He flinched. "You thought you could erase me," I said, my voice steady and cold. "You thought because I stayed home and cooked your eggs that I was stupid. You forgot who I was before I met you. You underestimated a mother. And you definitely underestimated a data analyst." Julian's face crumpled. He looked at the handcuffs, then back at me, desperation leaking from his pores. "Elena, baby, please," he stammered, tears streaming down his face. I didn't want to do it. It was her. It was all Sienna. She made me do it. Elena. She said we had to. She manipulated me. I love you. I still love you." I looked at him, this man who had promised to love me, who had then plotted to lock me away in a padded room so he could steal our son and our money. He was not a king. He was a coward. "Save it for the jury." "Julian," I said, turning my back on him. Judge Holloway cleared her throat. The room quieted down as the officers dragged the sobbing defendants toward the side exit. "Mrs. Vance," the judge said, her expression softening, "it is the ruling of this court that all allegations against you are dismissed with prejudice. You are hereby granted full, sole, legal, and physical custody of Leo Vance. Furthermore, I am issuing an immediate freeze on all assets belonging to Julian Vance pending a federal investigation into the bribery charges. You and your son are safe." The relief hit me so hard I almost collapsed. I grabbed the edge of the table to steady myself. Suddenly, the doors at the back of the courtroom burst open. My sister, who had been waiting in the hall, stood there holding Leo's hand. Mommy Leo broke free and ran down the aisle. He didn't care about the judge or the police or the cameras. He just ran. I dropped to my knees and opened my arms. He slammed into me, wrapping his small arms around my neck, burying his face in my shoulder. I held him tight, smelling the scent of his hair, feeling his heart beat against mine. "I got you," I whispered into his ear, tears finally spilling down my cheeks. "I got you, baby. We are free." Around us, the gallery erupted into applause. Strangers, court clerks, even the stenographer were clapping, but I barely heard them. All I could hear was my son breathing, safe and sound in my arms. The nightmare was over. We had won. 3 months have passed since the courtroom doors slammed shut on my past life. The silence in my new home is different from the silence in the mansion. It is not heavy or suffocating. It is the peaceful, rhythmic silence of a life being lived on its own terms. We moved into a small cottage just outside the city limits. It has a wraparound porch and a garden that was wild and overgrown when we arrived. But we are slowly taming it together. There are no marble floors here to echo our footsteps, just warm hardwood that creaks comfortably under our weight. The news cycle has finally moved on, but the consequences for Julian and Sienna are etched in stone. The federal investigation sparked by the video on the iPad uncovered a decade of bribery and fraud. Julian was sentenced to 15 years in federal prison without the possibility of parole. Sienna received 10 years for her role in the conspiracy and for perjury. They are currently sitting in cells that are significantly smaller than the walk-in closets they used to obsess over. Justice was not just served, it was absolute. I took the settlement money, which was substantial, and I knew I could not just sit on it. I founded the Beacon Center, a nonprofit organization dedicated to helping women escape financial abuse and gaslighting. We provide legal aid, forensic accounting services, and therapy for women who, like me, were told they were crazy for asking where the money went. It feels good to turn my scars into a shield for someone else. I also returned to my roots. I am now working as a freelance cybersecurity consultant. Companies pay me a premium to find the holes in their systems before people like Julian can exploit them. But the biggest change is in Leo. He is no longer the miniature adult Julian tried to mold him into. He wears mismatched socks if he wants to. He gets mud on his knees. He laughs with his whole body. Julian had pushed him to study economics and Mandarin, but I discovered that Leo has an incredible eye for photography. I bought him a starter camera, and he spends hours in the garden, capturing the way the light hits the leaves. One evening, as the sun was setting and painting the sky in shades of purple and gold, we sat on the porch swing. I was setting up a new iPad, transferring our files over. Leo leaned his head on my shoulder, scrolling through the gallery with me. We scrolled past photos of our new house, of the dog we adopted last week, and of his latest photography projects. Then, his finger stopped. On the screen was a leftover thumbnail from the evidence folder, a grainy screenshot of Julian and Sienna at that New Year's party. Leo frowned, his brow furrowing in a way that used to break my heart, but now just made me want to protect him. "Mommy," he asked softly, pointing at the screen. "Why do you still have that ugly picture? They look like monsters." I looked at the image. For a long time, looking at it had fueled my rage. It had been my weapon, but the war was over. I didn't need weapons anymore. "You are right, Leo," I said, smiling down at him. "It is ugly, and it doesn't belong in our story anymore." I tapped the trash icon. A message popped up, "Delete photo permanently." "Do you want to push the button?" I asked. Leo nodded vigorously. He pressed his small finger against the glass. Delete. The image vanished, replaced by a picture of Leo grinning with ice cream all over his face. "There," I said, kissing the top of his head. "Now we only keep the good memories." Okay, Leo chirped. He hopped off the swing and ran toward the garden. "Mom, look, the night flowers are opening." I watched him run, his laughter drifting back to me on the cool evening breeze. I looked out at the garden, where the hydrangeas we planted were bursting into bloom, vibrant and strong. I took a deep breath, filling my lungs with the fresh, clean air of freedom. I was no longer a victim. I was no longer a wife in a gilded cage. I was Elena, and for the first time in forever, the future looked bright. Thank you so much for listening to my story. I hope it reminds you that no matter how dark things get, there is always a way to fight back. Please comment down below and let me know where you are listening from. I would love to hear your thoughts and connect with you all. Don't forget to subscribe to the Lily Revenge Stories channel, like this video, and hit that hype button so more people can hear this story. See you in the next one.